so much to great things and Dylan beat his band that I'm losing my voice today, so I'm not going to do it too much. Okay, in this room today, we have the UX and CSS track. We're going to be learning how to build apps that people can use, how to make them look good, and most of all, how to understand our users. And to kick us off for our first talk today, we have, let's see if I can get this correct, Janne Jensen. Thank you, my awful English pronunciation there. Going to be talking to us today about design tools, about how design tools should read and write code. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Good to see you guys. Well, it's hardly morning anymore, but still. Right. Who am I? Just quickly, so you know. My name is Janne Jensen, as Tracy so nicely said. And I am the CEO and co-founder of Henosia. My background is as a software engineer many, many moons ago. And I topped that up with a PhD in UX. Did some research at the local university as part of my UX, and then I took the jump into the private sector. Worked at Trifork, at Lego, at Elsevier, and then 2.5 years ago, I took the big jump into entrepreneurship and started Henosia with a companion. So that was like very briefly about me, and I'm just going to let everybody get in and sit. Because then I would like to hear a little bit about who you are. So who in the room are developers, front-end developers? Yep, that's a good chunk. And who in the room are designers? Okay, there's a few. Good, good. And just for the record, everyone else is like back-end, business, PM, stuff like that. Hands up. Yeah, so that's actually quite a lot. All right. Well, I said, are you a developer, are you a designer? But that's a very black and white question. And people might actually not be an either or, but maybe an and. How many in here are designers who actually end up doing a little bit of code or reading code or taking technical responsibility in some sense? And how many in here are front-end developers who actually take a pride in the UX they deliver as well? Hands up, come on. I can't do this alone. All right, so there's actually quite a few of you as well. That's good to see. Right, so, the process that usually takes place, and this is of course very generic because there's a lot more fuzziness to it than this, but you have a collaboration between a designer and developer, and it usually goes something along these lines, that the designer starts out by creating a design in a vector tool of some sorts. And then once that design is more or less done, you raise a ticket in GitHub, in Jira, whatever your tool is, and say, this is done, I would like to have it coded now. Then at some point, a developer picks it up in a sprint and takes on that development task. At some point, that developer will ping me back and say, I'm now done. Could you have a look, see if it looks the way you want? I review the coded interface. Then whatever necessary changes are made. So I might have forgotten something, the developer might have forgotten something, but we take a few iterations and then we get to a point where the coded interface is accepted. And once that happens, to the degree you haven't done it under coding the interface or under the necessary changes, that code is now matured for production. That means tests, security, APIs, all of that stuff. And then you're done. But that's a quite long process, and that's not even all of it, because just for instance, that one is usually multiple iterations back and forth. Then there's also all of the user research, all of the testing continuously along the way, and so on and so forth. So it's actually quite a long and complex process. And personally, I don't think it works very well. And I'll give you an example why. Because as a designer, my responsibility is to the design. Yet I don't really have control of the design. And what do I mean by that? Well, I can influence the design because I create it in a vector tool of some sort. But I do not have control over it because never once in my life has the Figma drawings I've been making made it in front of a user. That's never the product. That's always only a drawing. That's never the product. The product comes out of the hands of the developer, meaning it's the developer who has control of the user experience, yet I have the responsibility for it. That doesn't work very well. But it's not just for designers that this doesn't work too well. Just a quick show of hands. Who in here has, within the last month, copy-pasted something from the inspect panel in a vector graphics tool into code? Yeah, because that's the handoff today. That's how it takes place, is manually inspecting and figuring out what has changed compared to the last version of this. And that's also how a lot get lost, because then, oh, you missed that spacing, or that's the wrong blue, or whatever it might be. So this whole thing about it's integrated with code, last time I checked, the clipboard was not an integration. But that's how a lot of marketing is made. And it brings me to something more of a philosophical character, because there is this tale of two islands. You have probably, many of you heard it in your organizations that, oh, we should break down the silos, right? How many have heard that in their organizations? We should break down the silos, yeah. Silos are bad, apparently. We tend to think of it as islands. So here I am, I have my UX island. Over there is a developer on a developer island. And there can be more islands. There can be a translation island, there can be a copyright island, there can be a back-end island. All of these islands are what collectively makes the product, because the product doesn't exist without any of these. And so far, the only way we've found to connect these, well, early on, it was about throwing things over the fence, basically. So I would throw things to the developer over there, hope he or she caught it. Maybe he or she didn't. It would fall into the water. It would get eaten by sharks. I don't know, but the process wouldn't be very good. Somebody quickly realized this, and they started building bridges between these islands. Bridges, aka, for instance, vector tools, because that was a better way to handle the handoff process. And that's true. It's better than throwing it back and forth between islands, but you still have to cross back and forth on that bridge. You haven't really come any closer to each other. So that was there for a few years. Then somebody said, oh, but we have a much smarter way. We can make tunnels, aka no-code or low-code tools. So they started digging tunnels between the different islands. Nevertheless, you still have to go back and forth. The islands are still no closer to each other. And that's really where we think the fundamental problem is. So what we think should be done, and that might just be me being really optimistic, but get out one of those big, big guns that you see, harpoons that you see in spy movies, with the big hook that actually makes you able to climb up buildings. Shoot that across to the other island, so it grabs hold of it, and then we'll just start pulling. Start pulling those islands together, because what should happen is that all of those separate islands really should be one island altogether, and that island should be the product island. Because let's face it, that's what all our jobs are about. It's the product we deliver to the user, and we each have a role to play. So it's not separate islands, it's one island, it's called the product island. We are all product builders. We're not designers, developers, researchers, copywriters, and so on. We are product builders. That's what we should be. But so far, one of the reasons that we stay on our separate islands is because each separate islands have their own tool. They have their own medium. So there's more right now that separates us than what unites us. And there's a way around that. Because just imagine if instead of having a vector tool that just produces drawings, I could actually have a visual editor, an IDE for designers that reads and writes code. What would that then give me? That would allow me and my developers to be working in one medium, which is code. And that's the only medium it can be, because that's what makes it to the user. Not drawings, not Jira tickets, not any of the other stuff we do. It's the code that makes it to the user. So that has to be the common medium. But obviously, if you start talking to designers about that, they'll go, I don't want to code. If I wanted to code, I would have become a developer. Which is why we don't want them to code in the regular sense. Writing code, handwriting code, like so many of you in here are doing. We want to give them an interface that is a lot more familiar to what they're used to. So, supports the process that they have, the way they prefer to work and so on, but is actually coding behind the scenes. And how would that work then? Well, today we have this setup. This has been here for ages. You have some kind of IDE, whatever your preference is, and it's integrated with your code repository, whatever your preference is. Tight integration. You can push and pull code back and forth as much as you like and need. That has been there for ages. There's a reason for that. It works well. And then over here, sort of in the corner, you have the design tools. And the design tools, as you can see, they're not integrated. There's no arrow there. Maybe, if you're lucky, there's a dotted arrow one way. And what I mean by that is that a lot of design tools today are allowing you to generate code or export to code. But there's multiple reasons for why that doesn't really work very well. One, yes, you can put that into GitHub, but usually the code is quite poor, so you don't want that in GitHub. You want it cleaned up first. And secondly, you can't go the other way. It can't go back into the design tool. So let's just, for argument's sake, there's really not any integration there. But that could be different if we had a visual IDE, because an IDE is an IDE no matter what, whether it's visual or not. And then that would give us this, an equally strong integration that you have with the developer tools as well. That has multiple things in it. It makes the designer and the developer much more equal in creating the product. It also means that the collaboration now can happen through here, back and forth like a pendulum, rather than through Jira tickets or whatever tickets you're raising. So this finally means that we have one source of truth, which is our code repository. So we no longer have design files that has one design in them, and then code files that have another design in them, and then what is the right one, and which one is up to date, and who's responsible for syncing the two, and all of these sorts of things that you have today. So that would solve a lot of stuff if we could do it that way. And it would actually mean the process that we saw before would then all of a sudden look something like this. The designer creates a design in a visual IDE. The developer helps develop the design in a regular as well as a visual IDE. So the developer can work in both depending on what works best at any given time. And all of that collaboration happens together. And the next thing is, then you mature the code for production. And you're done. That's a whole lot of step taken away from the process we had before. And then, well, what do we win other than just a shorter process? Well, we actually win quite a few things, both of us. I gain control of the real UX. Now I'm actually producing it, and whatever I'm producing in that visual IDE is what makes it to the user, not whatever translation a developer does of my drawings. I get instant feedback. I'm sure quite a lot of you have had designers come up to you and say, I'm not sure that this will work once it's coded. Could you perhaps create a quick and dirty prototype for me? How many have done that recently? Yeah. I don't need that anymore from developers because I can do it myself and see if it works. And obviously, the much improved two-way collaboration is also a big win in this. And for the developer, their win is that they no longer get to be design printers. Because let's face it, most of you guys, you did not take a degree in computer science or software engineering to be copy-pasting hex codes back and forth between interfaces. It's just not challenging. And there's so much better things you could do with your time. So that helps you with more bandwidth. If you don't have to support me with all of these tedious tasks anymore, that clears up time. And let's face it, it's not like you're missing work to do, right? I don't think I've ever met a developer who isn't busy. I don't think I've ever seen a software organization that didn't have at least 5 positions up on their job board that they couldn't fill. So there's a big shortage of good developers, and that means that most of them are overworked. This gives them more bandwidth. And again, the two-way collaboration works 2 ways. Surprise, surprise. But isn't that just no code, what I just described? No, it's not. Because no code is a black box. You don't know what happens in there. It's a bespoke garden, it's a walled garden, it's a bespoke data format, and you don't know what's going on in there. And then whenever you're happy with whatever you've done in your no-code or low-code tool, then you export it to code. But it's a different format. It's a change of data format. And because there's a change of data format, that means you also have a data loss. And that means you can't really do that, because you're missing information. So no-code and low-code tools will always only be one way. And that really means that there's only really one solution to it, which is that when you have your Visual IDE, your code is in one format, in this case, React and TypeScript, just for argument's sake. And once you push it into GitHub, it's still React and TypeScript. It's the same format, no data loss. And because there's no data loss, all of a sudden, we can take it back into the tool again. Now all of a sudden you have a two-way street here. So this is all of the philosophical discussions behind what we're doing right now. And just to give you an idea of what it is we're doing, let's jump into this one and show you, because that usually works much better. Right, so what we have here is the desktop view of Henosia, if you will. And it has, let me just see if this is working. Yes. So right here we have opened a project. It's a Next.js project, and it's based on Material UI. It could be based on another design system. It could be based on your own design system in your organization. It could be based on components that we quickly scanned in a code base that you loaded in and then working from there. So there's lots of possibilities here. And it's, like you said, or like you can see, it's a familiar interface, because on the left here, we have, once I start actually building stuff, we have a tree here with the different layers of your design. And on the right, we have the props panel with whatever props of whatever it is you have marked. So let's have a look at how that actually could look when I build something. Up here, I have shortcuts to some of the things I use the most. So let's start and say, I'm building, for argument's sake, I'm building a job site. A job site that shows all of the different jobs that you can apply for. Each job is in a card, and that card has all of the information you need for that job and the ability to apply to the job. That's the case study we have here. So I will start with a card. As you can see here, there's a lot of different things that's called something with card. All of these are really small components. And to avoid that every time we're building a more complex component, we have to do it from all of the small components, you can actually make snippets and then use those instead. So I have a card snippet here, a card with actions that I can insert and start from there. That looks something like this. I would like to have an image at the top. Ah, that's because I can't spell. There we are, card image. And I'll put that in. Then I get a panel like this, and I can choose exactly where to place it, before, above, inside. Or in this case, I can just replace the placeholder with the image. So I do that. And then, obviously, in the content part of the card, I want a lot of different text and information about the job. And I know that already, and it'll probably be stacked on top of each other. In code, they call horizontal stacks, vertical stacks, inlines, whatever. It depends on what you're coding in. Here we're calling them stack, inline, and box. Those are the three components we have for laying out stuff. For the designers who are using Figma, that's what's called auto layout in Figma. So I'll start by putting in a stack, and I'll replace the placeholder with that. And then you get these two. But the important thing is you also get this handle. That means I can actually start controlling the white space in between. Quick and easy, just like you would in any drawing tool. Obviously, the job needs a title. So I'll put in some text. And I get lots of different typographies here. I think I'll go with the typography H4. And I replace again, and I get something like this. And I'll say we are setting up a job for a product designer, like this. Obviously, you also want to know where you're working, and I've pinned my typography up here because then I don't have to go into the insert menu every time. So I can just do that, put that in. And then we will be working at Unicorn Design Limited. There we are. And I don't want that to be a body. I want that to be an H6. You've probably seen that at job sites, that the various workplaces have a rating based on the people who work there or people who have worked there. And that's a good thing to know when you're applying for a job. Is this a good place to work or not? So let's put in a rating component as well. And material design has a nice rating component that's just plug and play. And I want to put that in after the name of the company. Now you see it made a purple outline there. And it says at the bottom, a new inline will also be inserted to achieve the layout. So rather than just put it directly after, it'll put in an inline because then I can adjust the spacing after. So here I got the handle here, I can adjust the spacing. But yes, I want this right aligned, and I could do that like this, but then what happens is as soon as I start resizing my card, it's still not right aligned. So that wouldn't work very well. So this is not the way to achieve this. Instead, I'll insert a spacer. A spacer takes up whatever space it is allowed to take up. And, oh, I have the wrong one marked. There we are. So I put that in between, and now it's right aligned. And that means if I then start resizing my card, it now stays right aligned. Right, so that was one stack. I also want some practical information about the job, so I'll be putting in another stack underneath. And then in each of these, I know I'll have an icon and a label afterwards. So, oh, actually, no, not that one. So I'll put in an inline and replace that one. So in other words, stack and inline and box can be nested again and again inside each other to achieve the layout you need. And in this case, I'll then put in a pin. This one. And I want something about salary as well, so I'll have the $sign icon like that. I then have some typography there and some typography there. And the job, this one at least, is in Melbourne, Australia. And it's 120K a year job. So far, so good. Then I want a typography underneath because I want a description of the job as well. And just so you don't have to sit here and watch me type, I've actually prepared that, and I'll just copy paste that over. So like this. Obviously, you also need to be able to apply for the job, and this section of the card is the action part of the card. So I'll put in a button here, and I think we'll go with the text button. Replace that and say, apply for job, like that. And it would also be nice if you can save a job that you've seen that you might want to apply to later. So let's make it possible to make it a favorite job. But unlike the icons I put in before that are not interactive, this actually needs to be. So it's not just an icon, it's an icon button. So I put that in, icon button here, and as you can see, it puts in a garbage can as the default icon. That's just to have something in there, otherwise it becomes an empty container. But I can quickly replace that and say I want a favorite icon in there. So like this one, put insert and say replace the delete icon. There we are. And again, I want that right aligned just like we had before with the rating components. I'll put in another spacer. And there we are. Now I've sort of built out a card, but I'm not entirely happy with the layout. There's something that bugs my designer eye. It's all black and it's all more or less the same size of text and stuff like that. So I think I'll do some tweaking here. So I'll be putting in the various colors and sizes. And the interesting thing here is whatever you see here will be the colors of your design system. So in this case, it's the colors from the material UI, but if you have your own design system, it will be your colors. Same with the spacing. The spacing tokens will be the same that are in your design system, and so on and so forth. So I'll put this in, and that one. There. And this is a bit big, so I'll actually change the size as well. There we are. To a small instead. There we are. And then it sort of looks cramped, so I'd like to do something about that as well. And I realized that the reason it looks crammed is because I've got various stacks and stuff here on top of each other, but with no way of spacing it. As you can see, these three components are right on top of each other and with no way of putting in spacing. So I'd like to change that, and I've marked them in the tree, and now I can just say wrap that selection in a stack. And now there's a stack here on top, and now you can see now I actually got the handle, so now I can start spacing that out. So do that, and then I think I want those closer, and same with this one, also a little bit closer. Something like that. Let's leave it at that. That's enough for now. Now I'm done. But if this had been any other kind of design tool, now would be the time I would raise a ticket and ask somebody to code this, because it would just be a drawing. That's not the case here, because this is actually the real component, the live component. You can see here when I go into play mode, I actually get all of the hover effects and the click effects and whatever else I have that you would have normally with those components. So it's been coded. And if you want to see what that looks like, not that one. Then here is my GitHub part of the program. So before changes, I just had an empty card. After the changes, I now have the full card built out. That's the visual comparison of the changes that happened. But there's also changes made in the code. So this is where I resized the card to a different size. Here you can see over here, that's all of the components that I actually imported. And here they are being put to good use. So that's what that looks like. Let me push that. There we are. All changes have been pushed. And now I have open over here, I have the online IDE in GitHub. This was the initial code snippet that was in the file, but let's pull and see what comes in. There we are. Those are all the components that I just built out the card with, and you can see they're being put to use down here. Now for the thing that other tools can't do, because now as a developer, I have changes to the design. So I realized it's not in Melbourne, it's in Sydney. And because it's in Sydney, they get paid more as well. And finally, they got the rating wrong. It's not a 3, it's a 5. So I've not done a few changes here. Let's push that. Say update it, city, pay and rating. And I'll push that. There we are. Now that's been pushed, and I switch back to Henosia. And oh, I got an update. I can obviously, if I'm busy working, I can delay it till later, but let's just pull it in for now. Keep an eye on the rating, the city, and the pay. See how that changes. There you are. Changes directly in. But this whole back and forth, that might actually be a tedious thing going back and forth that many times. If we look at this, I might actually... Oh, that's because I'm in play mode. There we are. So I can do changes. So it's not just about building out the design. I can keep doing changes to it. So in this case, I'll do that. And I'll change the spacing in this one. And again, commit. Changes are much less now, but they're there, and you can especially see that in the source code. And unlike what you would see in a no-code and low-code tool that would just take the whole thing and throw it at GitHub once again, we do what you guys would do. Surgical precision, going in, changing just the values that need to be changed. So the title here and the spacing here and nothing else. So, updated title and spacing. I push that again. There we are. But that might get annoying going back and forth like this. Every time you have to do something, it has to go via GitHub, but it doesn't. So right now I have this rating component, but as you can see, it has a hard-coded value of 5. And that means that I can't really get an idea of how it works and how it looks when you start changing the rating. So I ping my designer over Slack or whatever and say, do you have a minute? Can you jump into Henosia? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he jumps in and goes into the file I'm in. Here he is. And now we've got multiplayer going on. So now he can work with me in the same. And he'll say, yeah, sure, I'll just connect this and make this dynamic. So I right-click on the rating component, I press Edit Code, and then I get an editor panel. Once it's done thinking, yeah. And here you have the rating component. So I've prepared this, so I'm going to put in a hook. And again, so you don't have to watch me typing too much, I have it just here. And I'll just quickly dump that in. So this actually allows me to read the rating, and I can do, where are we? There we are. And here it allows me to change the rating. So I'll just put that in. There we are. So that was him just quickly doing that. As you can see, while he was working, the artboard was locked because he's working on the file, so to avoid people stepping on each other's toes and conflicts and stuff, that file is locked, just like you would do if multiple people are working in the same file through 2 IDEs. But as soon as he saves, then that's again cleared up. And he's done what he needed to do, and he can go back to whatever he was doing. And I'm a happy camper because now I actually have a rating component that's no longer hard-coded, but tied to code. And if I go into play mode, I can now see how it actually works and looks, because it remembers what I had pressed. So that makes that collaboration between designer and developers faster, because now it doesn't even have to go through GitHub. It can be directly done via multiplayer in Henosia. Right, but obviously, the only thing that's hard-coded here is not just the rating component. Everything else is hard-coded, and that's also not a very nice thing. Designers, most of you guys know this, that to account for all of the different states and all the different kinds of data you can have in a design, you end up with like 30 duplicate screens in Figma, and all of it has to be kept up to date manually with the data that's in there. That becomes very tedious very soon. But we can do something about that. And in this case, I have the job card that we just built together. I actually have a more generic version of that here, where, as you can see, there's no data in there. But now I can open my data panel here, and everything here is actually tied to the data in the data panel. So if I change the data here, it actually also changes in the card. And the beauty of this is that now I can actually start pulling in data, because designers also know this, that you can have created a beautiful design, and then as soon as you attach an API and the real world comes knocking, everything falls apart, because data from the real world is just always more messy than anything else. So in this case, it's just a mere CSV file, but obviously down the line, we want to be able to attach APIs and stuff like that, any data source that you would be interested in, really. Oh, stop doing that. Here we are. So I just drag and drop that into the panel, and as you can see, now I have all of the data in the data panel, and if I close the data panel, you can see it has now populated not just one card, but as many cards as there were lines of data for. And the beauty here is that because this is the actual coded components, I can see how they behave and will behave in a browser going forward. I can see where the breaks are, I can see when it will go into one column, and so on and so forth. And if I go into play mode, I can also see it has put in a scroll bar because there was too much for it to fit into the artboard I had created. So that actually solves a lot of the problems that we have working with data. All right, and the last thing I want to show you, I just want to make sure because I had a lot of stuff to show you. Yes, the last thing I want to show you is that a lot of designers are really happy with the whole idea of sketching. Rarely do we start at this high fidelity when we're working. Rarely are we starting with relative positioning. We always work with absolute positioning, throwing a lot of stuff on an artboard and then starting to move things around. We'll be able to do that as well. Just like you saw me wrap a few components into a stack, that's how that will happen. We can throw everything in as absolute positioning. Then you can mark the things you want, saying that should go in an inline. Then those two inlines should go in a stack. That stack should go with these two elements into another stack, and so on. And you can start curating your design that started as absolute positioning into relative positioning and making it more and more code-like. But the sketching part, that's also a big part of what we do as designers. There's just nothing better than the creative process of having a really nice notebook and a really nice pen and then just be sketching out ideas. And we were sort of thinking, how far can we push this? Can we actually start drawing in code? And this is very crude. This is basically just a proof of concept. But it gives you an idea of where we can go with this. So let's go back to the card we had before. And now I want to put in another icon with another label down here. So I choose draw in code, and then I'll say I have this thing and I want something underneath. And it recognized that, oh, she probably wants a stack component. So there is my placeholder, and inside that I would actually like to have two things next to each other. Oh, that's an inline component. Then I get that, and then I can start working from there. I'll put in a calendar icon, and I'll put in a typography, and then I'll put in the deadline for when to apply, like that. And just like before, I'll change the color, and I'll change the size and the color of that one as well. There we are. Obviously, right now, it's not recognizing very much. It's recognizing an inline and a stack, and drawing with a mouse is a bit of a crude thing to try to do. But the whole idea here is the potential of it. Because if you combine that with a drawing pad and then machine learning, that over time learns exactly how you draw, learns your handwriting, learns how you draw a drop-down, a button, and whatever else you're drawing. And then you can basically just sit on your board and draw away, and it'll start not only converting it to hi-fi designs in here, but actual hi-fi components, working components, coded components. That has a huge potential because that can skip a whole lot of the process of design. And it's not like you put in extra work, so you're still free to do all of the variants of a design that you want to compare and see what works the best. That was it for the demo, and I just want to jump back into the slides and just do a quick wrap up from here, because why are we doing this now? Why is now the right time? Why has nobody done this before? These sort of things is interesting to start talking about, because there's a reason for this. First of all, browser capabilities. Only now are browsers becoming strong enough to actually run a code engine, because we're running a code engine within a code engine, and that requires some power, especially if you need to do it 60 frames per second and with multiplayer on top. That's tough on a browser. So 3 years ago, 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. Secondly, there's a lot more designers that are becoming hybrid designers now. A lot of universities are no longer educating regular designers that just know how to draw in a drawing tool. Almost all of them have some code experience once they come out of university. And you see more and more examples of, like, Google and Microsoft, they are hiring more and more design engineers and these kind of hybrid titles, because they realize that you cannot know just one field and nothing about the other. So more and more developers are going to have to know about UX. More and more designers are going to have to know about code. So we're moving to a place where the hybrid designers are more and more predominant. And if you know the power of code, then you will be less willing to settle for the lack of power that you have in vector tools today. Language and frameworks, TypeScript and React have swept the field over the last 5 years or so. And it is partly due to TypeScript that we are able to do this, because TypeScript supports the whole type ahead and makes us able to actually produce a props panel that gives you the values that are valid in your code. So that is also a reason that this is something that you can actually do now. And then finally, over the years, design systems have become more and more prominent, because people have realized, yes, design is important, but we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. How many millions are we going to pour into buttons in our organizations before we settle on one set of buttons and stick with those? So design systems is becoming more and more of a thing. There's more and more open source design systems out there, and more larger organizations are making their own design systems for their kind of applications. So that's actually just some of the reasons why the timing is right for this now. That was it for me. And yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm just thinking back to some of the projects that I was on where we did the work with the designers by printing everything out, putting it on one of the big rooms, manually editing it with marker pens, and then the designers went off and came back, and this looks really cool. Do we have any questions in the room? I'll come to you in a second.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. It looks like an amazing tool I could use as well as a developer. My quick question is it also something you are already using yourself, like dog fooding your own product to create your own website or projects you are running?
I'm so glad you're asking, because that's exactly what we plan to do. But this, just so also to manage expectations, right now Henosia is in an early alpha. So there's still a load of stuff that it cannot do yet, that it will be doing later on, but it cannot do that yet. We tried with our website to actually build that in Henosia, but it was too early. There were too many things we couldn't do. But the next website that we'll be putting up will be built in Henosia, because that's the only way for us to actually know if it works the way it should. On top of that, we're also partnering with some early customers that aren't paying for the tool in like cool cash, but they're paying with their time, their feedback, their insights and stuff like that, because that's the only way to validate something like this, is through real-world cases and see where does it break and what features is it missing. So yes, we will be eating our own dog food, absolutely. As a designer, I'm a huge fan of that.
All right, thank you.
This is how you get your exercise at a tech conference, by the way.
Yeah, again, thanks for presenting this. I think it's really awesome. So I have two questions. One is taking like a step back, right? So as you fed a design library into it, like the material UI, right? So I would still imagine that before even you get started with it, it could be that you still need some traditional UX tool just to create the design library, and maybe, you know, a team of developers who either create this design elements or, I don't know, adapt, you know, some existing one, and then you kind of feed this tool with it, right? And from that point, basically you know, keep going. Is it like that, or?
Well, right now it is, again, because it's an early alpha. But actually, the idea is that you will be able to create and expand your design system in Henosia further down the line. The reason for this is because people think, oh, but you can do anything in Figma. You actually can't, because Figma has like the very minimal Legos that it works with as well, such as the rectangle. That's a like very basic Lego in Figma, and typography, very basic thing in Figma. And then you build out components from there with all of these basic components. But if I was to say, I want my own handwriting in Figma, Figma will go, I can't do that. That's not possible. You can have the fonts that we support, but you can't have your own handwriting. So Figma has a limit to what you can do in there as well. That's also built out of small Legos. We plan to do the same thing, which is have if you will, a simple box, a simple typography, and like these very, very basic elements that allows you to start building larger components that you can then add to your library and start using across your projects. Obviously, that's still a while out, but that is definitely the plan, that you'll be able to create and maintain your design system in Henosia as well.
Okay, so in that case, like, would it not kind of stick you to a technology? Maybe right now you stick to React, right? But that also tends to change over time.
Yes.
So wouldn't it be actually better, like, if you have already flexibility in terms of, you know, you could feed this tool with whatever, language that has been used to build the library, and then designers could still use it? Because I think it's really valuable that designers are using components built by engineers, right? And then they are feeding it back to them.
Yeah. I mean, right now, yes, we are supporting React and TypeScript. Of course, there's a number of ways we can expand these tools. We can right now it's also only GitHub. It could also be GitLab and whatever other code repository people tend to use. Other than React, it could be Vue, Svelte, Angular, Solid, all of these. That's also the plan on a demand basis to start supporting those. Besides TypeScript, that will probably be the one that's most difficult to change and support something else, because TypeScript gives us so much that allows us to actually do this. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's significantly more difficult than the other ones. But it is doable. So that's merely a matter of where do we want to put our energy. In which ways do we want to expand the tool? But yes, we want to be able to support the frameworks and the languages that people are using, because that obviously allows us to reach more users and support more teams with these tools.
Yeah, cool. Just last one. So you also showed an example, where you could actually replace the static values with using a hook, right? Making it dynamic. So just to comment there, so that's one way to make components dynamic. But there are several other situations where you might want to do some server-side rendering to improve the performance or SEO. So I mean, that could be one region where it could get a little bit complex, So I think I still see a value even if you deliver components with a static value, because that could still be used also in some kind of, the component systems that also developers maintain. Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, we don't know where the line is to how complex logic and dynamic we can support with Henosia. But we're definitely going to push the boundaries on that. And I think we've already pushed it further than most people think you could. So it's something that we won't quite give up on. That said, the front-enders won't be out of a job anytime soon. There'll still be stuff that this can't do, and that there's no reason it should do, because it doesn't really make much sense to have it in a visual IDE. The visual IDE is for the design part of things. It's for the interface. It's not for the full front-end. The front-end is so much more than just the interface, and there's no reason to start doing that in Henosia, because that's done better in a regular IDE.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, with that, I'm afraid we're out of time. Are you around if anybody's got any more questions in the hallway?
Come find me and we can talk.
Okay, and with that, thank you very much for coming, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes or so.